Dr. Brian Glazer is an oceanography professor at University of Hawaii, Manoa for the past 19 years. In 2019, Brian launched Hohonu as a public-private startup to provide turnkey monitoring solutions for the community facing accelerating threats from climate change. Hohonu now operates in 100 locations around the United States, and Brian's going to tell us a little bit about his work at the environmental monitoring technology in the traditional Hawaiian fish pond. Brian.
Aloha, everyone. Could probably save 20 minutes and just say, Herb got it right. Like we could almost go through my slides and just listen to his story again, and it would almost be the same, just from a different perspective. It's a great privilege and honor to be here this morning. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm Brian. I was born in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, lived up and down the East Coast, but I've been lucky to call Oahu home for the last 19 years. I work as an oceanography professor. The kinds of things that we study in my lab are always chasing how chemistry, biology, and physics work together in the oceans. I spend most of my time on, in, or thinking about coastal ocean. I tell people all the time I'm not an engineer, I'm not a software programmer, but I can dabble. And over the last 9 years, we've had a lot of success blending my level of dabbling with learning new technologies and working with real card-carrying engineers. This is a picture, of course, of Iʻa Fish Pond during a king tide event. This is the new normal, right? This is not a storm. This is a tidal flooding event over a 400-year-old wall that has been rebuilt. Right? This is a glimpse into what we have on that long arc of sea level rise. The first half of the talk, I'm going to talk about how we started to do this. When I moved here from the mid-Atlantic, I, of course, love diving in reefs. I love catching mahi offshore, but these mucky waters, mangrove sediments, and productive estuarine nurseries really called to me, and started working with the groups at Paipai and other fish ponds right away. Some of the first projects I had funded through Sea Grant, through National Science Foundation, and through Eric and Wendy Schmidt's Family Foundation allowed a lot of this first part of the work. So, first of all, 400 years ago, the Hawaiians had it right? Thinking about how coastal ecology is really rooted in what is known here better as the Ahupua'a system. And when we look at a fish pond from the air, the top middle there, of course, is Heia, without losing respect and appreciation for sense of place, and all of that those top two left pictures mean, and I think we have a video playing here, we could also, this is a makaha in the video playing. This is the gate that allows for tidal exchange, really the lungs of these systems. That walled estuary is a technological innovation that the Hawaiians had right many, many years ago. Today, in addition to what Herb mentioned about needing to blend indigenous knowledge and contemporary technologies, the simple fact that today land use changes, eutrophication, temperature, carbon dioxide, we have stressors that didn't exist when these places were last functioning efficiently and effectively. Why not make use of some of the contemporary technologies that we can apply for good to help restore some of these locations? As a contemporarily trained in a university geochemist, I can, without losing respect and appreciation for sense of place, think of these places as a box. And that's what the right half of this diagram is really meant to think. If there's a process occurring in the pond and we think about what's coming in, what's coming out of that box, those arrows, whether it's atmospheric exchange, could be temperature, could be CO2, could be oxygen. If there's a river flowing in, makaha exchange, in and out, sedimentation, SGD, that's submarine groundwater discharge, right? Water coming up through the sediments. We need to be able to not only identify all of those arrows coming in to control those processes, but also put numbers on them. That quantification is something the Hawaiians had inherently when they lived in the fish ponds and operated them daily 24/7. Few have time to be able to operate these places like that today, and today we have tools that can do that for us. We put them out there, they don't get tired, they measure every second, and we can look at it from our phone. So what we typically do as geochemists is think about what our favorite parameter is. Maybe for aquaculturists, it might be dissolved oxygen. For limu, it could be nutrients. And we might have something available, whether it's a process to collect a water sample and take it to a lab, or buy an expensive sensor. Pictured on the left is a datason that probably many of you are familiar with, and on the right is something maybe more expensive, about $25,000, that measures many of those parameters. right? Spatially, we probably can only afford one or two of those, and temporally, it's very difficult to allow one of those to stay in continuously measuring forever. It's important to do that, though. In about 2014, I stumbled into some engineering innovations that became cost-effective and affordable. On the left is a small computer, right? It's a Linux computer. It runs an operating system analogous to Microsoft or Apple, right? And it's even more powerful than our $5,000 MacBook Pros because we can plug sensors into it. In the middle is a little radio. It's a walkie-talkie for computers to talk to each other. And on the far right is a pressure sensor, same pressure sensor found in scuba diving watches. With a small seed grant from University of Hawaii Sea Grant, I put these pieces together, and within literally weeks, a non-engineer was telemetering tidal data from makahas in a 400-year-old fish pond. The light went off for me, like, whoa, this is something cool. Took that to NSF, and we got probably a continued 5 years of funding to be able to spin this up. The idea of cost-effective, scalable ocean observing for non-research problems. Right? So fundamentally, it's a research question that academics can find, and in having an idea of better spatial variability, we can answer those basic hypothesis-driven questions, but we can also do it with this applied and operational oceanography in mind. Building circuits can be easy and fun, and this reaches out to some of the educational opportunities with this too. We can trick engineers into learning something about coastal eutrophication by letting them build the sensors instead of buying them from large commercial manufacturers. Falling into the valley of death can be easy and fun as well, right? How many academics can you imagine are out there who invented some kind of sensor, used it to graduate a student, publish a paper, move on to the next project, right? It happens all the time. In my own lab, have a long history of this valley of death idea. We didn't want to let this idea die in the valley of death. We heard from fish pond operator friends, the nearest NOAA tide gauge isn't close enough. The tide apps are not accurate. We've got 150 seventh graders coming to help us remove invasive algae at low tide. We're rebuilding rock at low tide, and we need to know. Depending on moon phase, trade wind stacking, rain events, could be 4 hours difference, even just a mile or two away from a nearest NOAA tide gauge to the ponds. And then inside the ponds, because of those walls and because of the Makaha exchange, they're not tidally harmonic, right? So we started, I'm not a physical oceanographer, I wouldn't have said, oh, let's go reinvent tides, how we measure tides, but because of that encouragement, we did. And so, when the federal government goes out and installs a tide gauge, it's between $100,000 and $500,000 to install the parts. It takes a team of engineers a week or more at the end of a pier. Now, when we do it, it's about $600 in parts, and I can ship this to you FedEx second day air, and you can install it yourself. And then we give you a website URL. So here's your data where you decide you need it most. Here's your URL so that you don't have to worry about how to maintain or operate this thing once the site is selected. And that's what we really had a lot of success working with the fish pond hui through KUA and through individual ponds. That spans over to other water quality parameters as well. Once we kind of cracked the nut about cost-effective sensors in the environment, maintaining a rigorous telemetry to feed that data back, and the cyber infrastructure. It's a really complicated word. National Science Foundation operates a program called the Ocean Observing Initiative. It's a 10-year, $300 million initiative. Measures in about half a dozen or so places around the globe. They have a $7 million a year cyber infrastructure team to deal with that data flow. You don't need that for a lot of these coastal watershed applications where we do need that rigorous sensor data and we need it continuously and unattended. Here, two pictures from He'ia at Hihimanu Makaha, looking at dissolved oxygen, right? The pond is breathing, high oxygen in the daytime when we're photosynthesizing, no photosynthesis at night, and so the only operable mixing is coming from air, wind, right? If the trade winds shut down a little bit, right? There is no oxygen penetrating into that water, and so the pond breathes at night, and that oxygen level can come down. Bottom half of the slide there is a pua pond. Historically, from stories passed on, it was thought that the pua would have been raised in that northern end of the pond, and so that's where this was restored. Of course, in several hundred years of sediment capture into the pond, right? The pond, the sediment water interface, and the oxygen demand in that corner of the pond are different today than it was when He'ia was last functioning at production 100 years ago. And so looking at those diel signals in oxygen, high in the daytime, low at night, And maybe if the trade winds shut down and temperature rises over several days, we can see in real time and say, look, these fish are going to begin to be stressed, need to do something, whether it's turn on bubblers or do paddle wheels, whatever aquaculture industry knows can avert, right, a low dissolved oxygen crisis. But now all of a sudden in a location that didn't used to have access to that kind of technology, we can apply that technology and help, right, try to think about restoration processes. I put this one up because this really illustrates that need for long-term, continuous, unattended presence. This is turbidity. This is about a 4-day span across the x-axis, and you don't have to worry about the units on the y-axis. One rain event, a single rain event in Hawaiian Fishpond coming down from the stream, and that spike occurring is maybe 90% of the particle input to Hawaiian in an entire season. That's that first flush of a storm. Right? If you're not out there, and who wants to be out there sampling water during a 10-inch rain event? Nobody. It's hard to get even graduate students to go do that. But sensors can do that. They don't get tired. They don't care about getting wet, and they're telemetering live data back. So then we can think about these kinds of episodic events and have the information to know when and how we have to go do more comprehensive sampling or management for these systems. Another case study that I wanted to show is a very different pond. This is over on Kauai's south shore, Nomilo Fish Pond. Most of the ponds in the Hui are shallow, pretty well mixed. Right? They might have some freshwater input and tidal exchange. When I first was introduced to Nomilo back in 2017 or 2018, it's very deep, right? It's almost 20 feet deep at the center. It's a drowned caldera, if you will, almost like Hanama Bay that hasn't broken through, and anoxic. And so I won't bother going into a lot of the data, but that top left plot, that image looking at dissolved oxygen, red is oxygenated and blue is zero oxygen. Right? So at Nomilo, they really had two ponds. One was this sulfitic wasteland below about 4.5 meters that is toxic, and if that overturns, can kill fish in that upper pond area. Right? Historically, Nomilo had been a place of shellfish aquaculture, and the family that runs it was trying to restore this. So we worked with them to provide some of these contemporary tools and technologies to constrain the actual processes that are occurring in that pond, help them think about what volume that pond holds and what kind of flushing rates they might need to better oxidize that entire water column. Opening up the OI helped them, and today in 2022, 2023, it's a different story where that pond is mostly oxic all the way to the bottom. Dave's here today and can answer some of your questions about the current state and production. Herb asked the question how many had been to fish ponds, and I'm just as ecstatic to see how many. I'm not going to ask people to raise hands, but probably a few of us have been to 10 or more. Each of these ponds is unique. Each of these ponds is similar. And that, to me, has been the really captivating thing to keep me coming back to them. And so showing two different kind of case studies and how we've been able to come in and help think about restoration for education, but also toward commercial production has been really just a fascinating part of this for me. In 2017, we convinced the National Science Foundation to fund a workshop. This was literally entitled Blending Indigenous Knowledge and Contemporary Technologies. We partnered with KUA on this and brought together the Hui. We had probably about 30, 35 folks from ponds all throughout the state, and maybe about 15 to 20 academics from oceanography and other departments on campus to really come together and have that bi-directional learning and communication of, tell us about your place, tell us about your challenges. Is it a mixing? Is it a conductivity problem? Is it low dissolved oxygen? What is it? And then how might we be able to apply some technologies? How might we be able to help you go out and find funding that you might not otherwise have been on your radar? We used this in the case of some of these tools and technologies that were emerging, but also communication and just learning about each other's spaces. We drove that up and down from graduate education, and pictured on the right is the SMART Alloy project. Strategic Monitoring and Resilience Training in the Alloy Watershed. It's the best acronym I ever came up with. I'll never repeat that one. We engaged with about 15 to 20 different undergrads across campus. We had technicians and about 30 schools in the watershed. 7th to 12th graders, we built a curriculum working with our nonprofits outside of UH and working with undergrads in the program at UH to, again, replicate this same kind of idea, blending contemporary technologies with environmental watershed problems. 30 schools, kids were building sensors, putting them out in Manoa, Makiki streams, and had more data in hand than a $300 million Army Corps of Engineers project that ended up not happening. Right? So that power of being able to trick engineering students into learning and caring about their watersheds, and tricking the Save the Whales kids into learning about data science and climate time series, right? How different would we be if we did this back in 2000 with the entire voting populace in America? So what we learned through all of this was, people are hungry for technological solutions to environmental problems. We started 2 different classes at UH where we teach non-engineers something about technology and data science for good, right, in the face of climate resilience. Billionaires are interested in this kind of thing. This is the coolest my email inbox has ever been. It'll never be this cool again, right? Eric Schmidt saying, hey, I'm down at the Royal Hawaiian, come down for a drink, let's chat about what we can do. And so initially in those early days, we saw that there is possibilities to do these as one-off research projects, but we knew those come and go all the time depending on funding. We instituted a recharge facility. So any university you go to across the US would have something, right? Where you take a water sample, you send it to a lab, they'll charge you $12 per sample for a phosphorus number or an isotope value. Nobody had done this though before. So we started a recharge facility where we said, send us $2,000 a year, we'll ship you a sensor, and here's your URL. Right? So it kind of flipped the model a little bit from going from a university lab as a service provider with $1 million instrument to a university lab saying, we have technological solutions to your watershed problem. And this got bigger than we thought it would. The demand that we got exceeded our capacity to do this in my lab as a recharge facility. UH loved the idea of thinking about commercializing this, and that's where this talk really could have been called Bridging Academic Basic Research to Applied and Operational Innovations in the Face of Accelerating Climate Threats. So that same story, from 1 fish pond in Kaneohe to 30 fish ponds across the state, scales to every coastal county. Every coastal state has a problem from the ongoing and increasing threats from accelerating climate change. We were encouraged enough by our funders and UH to launch Hohonu. It's a public-private startup. It is a for-profit company. The University of Hawaii is on the cap table. So is one of our favorite local Hawaiian nonprofits as well. It was really important to me that we kept that mission orientation of helping coastal communities in this and sent a message to our future investors that this wasn't just a for-profit company. And I'd be happy to talk more about how we kind of did all that later. So Hohonu is really meant to provide that turnkey water monitoring by scientists for everyone. We want to provide affordable environmental monitoring tools to protect coastal communities. The idea here is that everything that I just explained, working with communities, understanding what needs to be co-produced, right? What is the problem? What is the appropriate spatial scale? What might be an appropriate technology to deploy to help solve those problems is what we're trying to take to scale. It starts around this, right? Hyperlocal water level. Right? Again, instead of waiting for NOAA to install a $500,000 tide gauge somewhere near you, install your own, and we'll give you text message alerts so that we've got parents in South Carolina who can't pick up their kids from preschool at high tide, the road floods, and they don't know when that's going to be. We have mayors waking up at 3 o'clock in the morning wondering, do we close roads? Do we deploy sandbags? We have the city of Miami wondering how high do they need to raise roads? Right? This is a global problem. And by having that access to hyperlocal data everywhere allows us to start to have some insight about actionable decision-making for policies faced by episodic flooding. Again, flooding is the first key scalable piece of this, but because of our emphasis and our learnings from fish pond communities, right, we're also poised to bring in all of these other parameters. We did what was comfortable for us as academics, and instead of going to VCs who I didn't know, we went to NOAA and said, we're going to submit a proposal to do this. And we got funded. And so we have a 5-year funded contract with the Southeast Regional Observation Area. So from Florida to North Carolina, we had a 5-year contract to be able to do this and scale it out and work with communities to help them with their episodic flooding problems. That quickly spread through word of mouth. And so that idea of transferring the academic rigor without making it a research project from the research lab to the company, I think has been key to our success so far. We're working with Integrated Ocean Observing System, with Sea Grant offices, with National Estuarine Research Reserves all around the country now, as well as individual universities. We're now starting to gain enough traction that commercial entities like aquaculture facilities, dredging companies, and so on are all seeing the value in this kind of thing. Some of our clients, as I just kind of briefly went through there, town resilience, Sea Grant, indigenous groups, university researchers. And this is where, I love what Herb said, we didn't plan this, but this is where it really comes back to where it started for us at home. Because of the success that Hohonu got at the national scale and in multiple states, we were able to go and tap new federal resources to bring money back home here in Hawaii. And pictured on the bottom right there is again, this one happens to be in Ha'ia on an oyster restoration project. We worked with Purple Maya Foundation and KUA, and we were able to secure a federal appropriation to blend that outreach and hui development idea. And there are 30 new sensors across the state in fish ponds that didn't have access if it was left up to me to go get a Sea Grant grant or try to convince NSF into funding this. And so that idea of out of the lab into communities and then bringing it back into communities by having some success, some degree of scalability at the national scale, has now helped us to bring it back into Hawaii. We have over 1 million monitoring hours nationwide. We're able to do things with the company that I never could have afforded to do on a hypothesis-driven research grant from National Science Foundation, right? There's a web app, there's predictive analytics that we never would have been funded to do, competing against NOAA, right? What reviewers would have seen as competing against NOAA for tide predictions. We can do that with the company. Turns out we're 80% more accurate on 1, 3, 5, 7-day forecasts. So if a king tide event is coming toward you, NOAA's great at telling you when that's going to happen. We're better at saying how bad is it going to be for you in your backyard. So those kinds of things we're now able to bring back home and provide back to the hui. So there's over 30 sites now. This is all publicly available data. You can see it dashboard.hohonu.io. And again, working with KUA and Purple Maya has been a great pleasure to get to visit all of these places, and be happy to answer any questions later on through the day.